Which draft philosophy should the Jazz employ? Best available or fit? And does it change if selecting in the top 4 or selecting at 8? Find out next on Locked On Jazz.
You are Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Jazz. I'm Leif Thulin, excited to be back with you guys as we enter draft season as well as the playoffs. You guys know me by now, but I'm always happy to fill in for David Locke on Locked On Jazz because I'm a lifelong Jazz fan who's a credentialed NBA draft analyst for NBA Big Board. I will be attending the 2024 NBA Combine, and I attended the 2023 NBA Combine. I'll also be attending the lottery, so hopefully giving the Jazz good luck and getting a top pick. I'm a Jazz broadcast assistant the past 3 seasons, along with being a statistician, so I'll give you a unique perspective with a lot of those geeky numbers you're used to with David Locke, as well as a lover of college basketball, so I can keep you informed about a lot of these draft prospects who you may not have seen very much of, or what you have seen may have just been the tournament. So I'll keep you informed in this critical juncture of Jazz basketball as the Jazz search for their star and the chance to build a contender. All right. Thank you guys for making Locked On Jazz your first listen every day. And remember, Locked On Jazz is free and available to download on all platforms, including YouTube at Locked On Jazz, where the best way to help us grow is comment anything below. And today's question is, do you believe in best player available or fit? And who would you choose if you're drafting at 4 or at 8? So answer all of those questions, and I'll try to get my best to get back to you. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. And go ahead and make some money, placing parlays, spread bets, and more. And get the great deal that Locked On's offering using code LOCKEDONNBA, and we're going to talk about that soon. But we're also going to talk about this. In the first segment, I'll analyze the merits of both best player available drafting style versus drafting for fits. Plus, does it change if you're drafting at 4 or at 8? In the second segment, I'll be discussing the best backcourt partner for Keyonte George, and when or where should the Jazz prioritize that idea in the draft? Is it a big guard, or do you listen to Danny Ainge and say, well, we're not determined that Keyonte is a point guard, and thus you could maybe get a point guard and have him play the 2, and maybe size does matter, maybe fit doesn't matter whatsoever. We'll talk about all the merits of those discussions coming up next. And in the final segment, I'll be taking a look at if the Jazz end up taking a guard with the first pick, does that change the second pick and vice versa by saying which wings are available, and should they take a wing, does that maybe make them take a guard later? We'll discuss all of that coming up next. So let's dive right in on Locked On Jazz. I'll start off by saying this, just upfront and openly. My draft philosophy is heavily skewed to drafting towards potential and trying to pick players that can alter the course of the franchise at the top of the draft, which often leads me to believe that drafting the best player available is what to do. Not because of the idea of positionless basketball. Like, I'm not saying, oh, fit doesn't matter whatsoever, like some people do, because now there's no positions. No, not at all. It's because you're drafting that high. You need the horses who can change. If you're not good, if you're that bad to be picking there, in almost all likelihood, you need someone that can change your equation, make you something that you are not right now. And so you don't want to pick a guy who's just another piece in the puzzle. You want to pick the guy who is the cog to the engine of changing your franchise. So typically that's best player available, because if you're that bad, you don't have the positions you're not in the luxurious position of saying, oh, you know what, I want this player because he's different from the players that I already have. Well, you don't have the horses in the stable to say, well, we want to complement that horse. That's rarely the case. In the Jazz case, they do not have that guy. So you would take the best player available, regardless of, even if they were an exact clone of Lauri Markkanen. That's my take. But this is a big but here. This draft, I think the Jazz and other teams are hunting pieces, drafting pieces, not dudes, meaning that fit has more of a case to be this year's priority, because there aren't that many dudes in this class. Now let's explore how that impacts the Jazz. The Jazz have a 26% chance of drafting within the top 4 and a nearly 65% chance of drafting either 8 or 9. Like, you're going to be likely drafting there. Obviously 10's possible. And if you get 11, the Jazz don't have the pick. But that's a under 1% chance that happens. So the typical board I deem mostly consensus has pretty much all the following players listed in their top 10 or 12. So I'll give you my board. This is my initial board. I haven't put as much effort into this as I want, but I think this is well thought out enough to give you. My number one is Alexander Sarr. He's a big man. Number two, Rob Dillingham. Number three, Ron Holland. Four, Nikola Topic. Number five, Matas Buzelis. Number six, Cody Williams. Number seven, Stefan Castle. Number eight, Zachary Rees-Sachet. Number nine, Donovan Clayton. Number 10, Dalton Connect. Number 11, Reed Shepard. And number 12, Isaiah Collier. All right. I will first make the point that I think 3 through 6 on my board is very, very close, and I could change those at any point. And I just need to watch a little more film and convince myself of certain things. So that's the first thing I'll say. But now let's get back to the point at hand. What's the difference between 4 and 8? Typically, if drafting within the top 4, I think drafting the best player available must be the methodology with no if, and, or buts. But because the Jazz don't have a level of talent to say this player definitely should complement the established players, that is rare, and it's like I said, it's a luxury not frequently known. Like a couple times you'll get a number 1 pick and you'll get another top 3 pick and you still pick best player available. But sometimes that guy's the guy, or just team's not good enough. The Jazz don't have that. So I think in the top 4 you still take best player available, even though there aren't those dudes. You take the guy that you think can elevate your franchise the most, maybe the best piece, regardless of what you have on roster right now, because what you have on roster right now is not good enough to contend, even if you're not drafting a star. Let's go through some examples, though. The Jazz like Keontae George, but as Andy Larson on yesterday's episode, so thank you to everydayers who tuned in on that one. If you didn't, check it out. Andy was a great guest. He said, by no means should that keep them from selecting a guard with Keontae George, because the Jazz like him, but they don't love him enough to say, well, here you go. But let me rephrase this. So Andy said, by no means should having Keontae George prevent you from taking a guard, and I totally agree with that. But it's not the slight at Keontae. Keontae may or may not be the starting point guard of the future or a shooting guard, but maybe he is, maybe he isn't. Maybe he's best served as a microwave scorer off the bench. But if the Jazz love a guard, then go get a guard. Let's say Rob Dillingham or Nikola Topic are in the top 4 and the Jazz are there. Don't let George stop you from taking him. That makes sense to me. It would be really interesting to me at 1 if the Jazz would go for Sarr and tell him to play the 5 and then further relegate Kessler down the bench, as those two seem very unlikely to complement each other. But I think the Jazz would if they deem Sarr to be the best player. I don't think there's a question of, we're worried about the feelings here. I don't think that's the case. Now, at 8, I think the best player available often has a little less credence in many classes because of the talent pool drops off significantly. Typically, from 4 to 8, it's a here's your level of stars, and now here's your guys you hope can be good role players. That's what it is. This year, I think 4 to 8, maybe even 4 to 12. My 4 could be another person's 12, and vice versa. My 11 is Reed Shepard, and a lot of people have him in their top 5, and people that I respect as well, like Richard Stamen, who's been a guest on here. He has him in his top 5, and we disagree about that. But it depends on drafting philosophies. So it could be the same for many teams. Maybe they prioritize this player higher than others, and the Jazz get the guy at 8 that they would take at 4. That's very possible. With that said, many Jazz fans covet size at winger guard positions, and I don't think that even if the Jazz take a wing at 8, for instance, that would be a need or a fit. It would be because that position at the time in the place in the draft is most saturated. For instance, my board has 5 players 6'6" or taller that play 1 through 3 position wise that are ranked 4 through 8 on my board. Like that 4 through 8 are all 6'6" and taller, and they play 1 through 3. And thus, you're not taking a need. You're selecting the player that you deem to be the best and help develop your team as a piece, but maybe not the star with the rest of the youthful Jazz. It's not saying, well, this guy fits the best necessarily. Now, you're not also saying this guy we're hinging our future to, but you're saying this guy could help be a piece. And the question then would be this year, always, but this year in particular, would be, do you bank on high potential or safety, aka high ceiling or high floor of these picks, since all of them seem to be quote unquote fits when I rank 3 through 8, pretty much all guards and wings, and big guards or wings, I should say. So that's interesting, and that'll be explored in an episode coming up later this week, talking about the value of drafting for ceiling or drafting for floor. But coming up next, I'll be discussing the best backcourt pairing next to Keontae George, if you're drafting for fit, and where that is to be prioritized in this draft. Because like I said, there's a depth of wings in the middle at the way I have a board organized, but maybe that's not how other people or the Jazz have their board organized. So that's coming up next. is a big guard, or do you listen to Ainge and that Keontae's role is to be determined? So we'll discuss what guard fits best with the Utah Jazz and what they have in place. All right. But first, a word from DoorDash. Want to make mom smile? Start Mother's Day with flowers. Uh, or surprise her with gifts from the brands she loves, delivered with the very same day with the brand you've come to love, DoorDash. DoorDash is more than just great food delivery. For instance, does mom have a sweet tooth? Is she a tech enthusiast, a beauty connoisseur, or is she outdoorsy? No matter what she's into, you can make her smile with a fruit or flower bouquet, makeup, tech gear, workout gear, and much more. Shop with savings that would make her proud. With a Dash Pass membership, you'll save with a $0 delivery fee and reduced service fees on eligible orders from Dash Pass merchants that meet the minimum total. Other fees, including the service fee, do apply. Terms apply. So get all your Mother's Day gifts all in one place. Get 50% off your next order, up to $15 when you spend $15 or more on your next flower, convenience, or retail order. Now with code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA. Order today using DoorDash today. Terms apply. Also, let me tell you about LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just a job board that I peruse frequently. LinkedIn also helps you hire professionals if you're hiring that you can't find anywhere else. Even those who are actively searching for a new job but that might be open to the perfect role, you can get those guys too. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking at LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. That's pretty sensational. So hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnba to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Welcome back to Locked On Jazz. And by the way, I've got a question for you guys. Are you guys still watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day and you have to turn down the volume with all that shouting and monotony? Well, make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All righty, Leif Thulin back with you here on Locked On Jazz. So Danny Ainge said Keontae is not necessarily the point guard of the future, but that was not a disparaging statement toward Keontae. Just speaking truthfully and openly that a rookie who is good but not otherworldly isn't yet ready to assume the reins of the franchise at the point guard position. That seems pretty normal to me. It's all about perspective. Like, that's not a disparaging statement, though some fans interpret it as, oh man, we didn't get our franchise guy. You drafted him 16th. It wasn't like you took him number one. And even then, it's hard to tell if a number one guy is that good as a rookie. Like, Victor Wembanyama's are so few and far between. Obviously, he's not a point guard, but you get my point. So it's all about perspective. Now, let me posit the idea of the Jazz drafting different guards at different spots by saying which I believe fits with Keontae the best. So the best two guards with the highest potential to become all-stars and game-changing players, which is definitely not a guarantee. As I mentioned, I believe you're trying to build pieces in this draft. You're trying to draft pieces to build with, not to build around. The closest players to being able to be built around that are guards in this draft, according to me, this is my opinion, not necessarily something that everyone would agree with, are Rob Dillingham and Nikola Topic. Dillingham, because he can score for himself and set up others by using his speed and shot creation ability to put himself in a position to be a team's leading scorer and be able to make other players better with creation, getting into the paint, kicking out to shooters, hitting roll men, hitting short rollers. I think he could be a 21-7 guy fairly quickly in his career. There are questions about if that type of archetype is an effective winning player, and those are valid questions. But I like him. I think he's got probably the best chance of being an all-star from this class if he's given the reins. So if you have a chance to draft that all-star, I would do it because I firmly believe in best player available. But does he fit with Keontae? I don't really know. We'll go to Topic and then we'll discuss further. And as for Topic, because he has one glaring flaw, and that's shooting. If shooting hits, which as David Locke discussed in the episode talking about how you have to be able to shoot or hit athletic parameters and his analytically derived formula that's been pretty successful, Topic was on the borderline. He's not a great shooter, but he does have the redeeming quality of being an 88% free throw shooter, and he's a 6'6" guard who makes great and quick decisions as a driver who's 18 years old playing professional basketball, and he's performed well doing so professionally. The pitch would be that he could be a guy who bends defenses with his size and passing prowess. Well, those are the upside guys, and I think they have the best chance of being all-stars. So let's examine the fit. Should the Jazz care about that? Dillingham and Keontae do not fit side by side, as both are better on the ball and deficient defensively. Not to mention that would be a diminutive backcourt, and we know Jazz fans are scarred by that. Toppich would be more ball in hand as well, but drive heavy, and with his size, you wouldn't necessarily be sacrificing the size. So Keontae's shooting would be, which was streaky, would be pivotal to improve. Also, Toppich's shooting would be very important at that point, because now if Keontae were to have the ball, Toppich would need to be able to space, and vice versa. If Toppich drives and Keontae shot as streakily as he did this past season, that would be a not very good shooting backcourt and a not unbelievable defensive backcourt. So neither of those make a ton of sense, but you're not drafting for fit necessarily. If you believe those guys can be all-stars, which I think they have two of the best chances in this draft, then you're willing to take that chance. Now that leaves many Jazz fans' favorite target, Stephon Castle, as the best fit. That's who they believe is the best fit because he's defensively oriented and he doesn't necessarily need the ball to thrive. But I'd argue that drafting a piece is risky, as his positional size is only exceptional as the one. It's still good as a 2, but it's only exceptional if he's playing the 1. And maybe he was maximized by UConn, as much as many think he was held back by UConn being such a good team. Castle scares me a little bit especially because of his shooting issues. Like David Locke mentioned, that he's one of those guys that we ruled out by his shooting numbers, and it's rarely his numbers for shooting are rarely over to outperform those shooting numbers that woe you in college. You're rarely able to develop into a good shooter. It's very few and far between. One of the best examples of that would be Herb Jones, shot 7% from 3 in Alabama his junior year, and he's developed into an okay NBA shooter. And that would be like an example of success stories. And he's still a dare shooter in the NBA. So now on the ball, if Castle, you want to be your point guard, and some people have him as high as 1, like Kevin O'Connor has him 1. I don't know if you want your point guard to be on the ball at number 1 with shooting deficiencies as low as they were, according to Locke's analytics. And they've been proven successful through the 6 years that he's done this. And for those of you who don't know, I've done stats for David Locke for the last 3 years, but I've been listening to Locked on Jazz since I've been a little kid. And so I believe in those analytics as much as I believe in the eye test of basketball. So back to Castle and the eye test of watching tons of UConn basketball. So Castle scares me because shooting is paramount in today's NBA. So while he fits size parameters in spades next to Keontae, does their play style coexist? I don't know. That depends largely if either take substantial leaps as shooter, and if Castle cannot, he's the point guard and Keontae is forced to play off ball, or does his lack of spacing compromise Keontae if Keontae's got the ball in his hands? So while they'd improve defensively, and I think he could slash at the NBA level, I'm not too certain that you can expect this meteoric rise you expect from Castle just because he had a few good games in March Madness. And he was a very good player all season for UConn. That's not what I'm saying. He's deserving of being considered here. But I just have a little bit of a doubt, whereas everyone says, oh, he was held back by UConn. I wonder if he was maximized in terms of the role he played. The last guy would be Reed Sheppard. And while he can shoot the cover off the ball, the Jazz would be exceptionally small and inept defensively in their backcourt. And yes, I know some people would say, well, didn't Sheppard have over 2 steals a game and almost a block a game at 6'3"? Yes, but those are instinctual plays, not necessarily at the point of attack. And you can't rely on coordination and anticipation to be a point of attack defender next to another smaller guard in the backcourt. I do believe Sheppard will be drafted by a team wanting him to play point guard, and I doubt the Jazz would take him due to defensive lack of size and unproven and untested playmaking, especially when they have a guard in Keontae who they kind of made a similar wager with, and so far I think the returns would be successful. Like, I don't know if you'd make the same investment on a player that you would have to see the same archetype in order for him to pan out. I just don't see that one working as much. And lastly, should the Jazz take a guard with their top 10 pick? I would be shocked if their next 2 picks at 29 and 32 were not wings, especially big wings or bigs, because Ainge really likes size. And he typically likes youthful, athletic size. So that's the way I see it. That's the way I believe the Jazz will go. Should they go with a guard? Those are my thoughts on those guards. So that's the guard segment. Let's see who fits the best with the Jazz young core of wings and who the Jazz could select. But first, let me tell you about Monopoly Go. All right, game off. We got to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying. Flag on the play. You already talked about that. but there is just so much good stuff in this game I'm dying to tell you guys about. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with your friends for timed tournaments where you can work together to build up each other's boards. The more you uh, the way you can build up each other's boards, and the more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's so much to get. Unique stickers you can trade with friends to complete albums full of big prizes. Cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with. Hilarious emojis to taunt friends with when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new, exciting, and every day it changes with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. So you never have to worry it's getting boring. A ton include their own mini games that are unique, like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine. And then there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover on Monopoly Go. So get off the bench and go download it now free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. Also, let me tell you guys about Intercap Lending. Intercap Lending is one of the largest independent lending companies. They're unbelievably responsive, hyper responsive. They embrace change and have excellent borrow experience. The testimonials are off the charts. Everyone loves them. That they're also a direct issuer, and it's not just a Utah thing. That's a common misconception. There's 44 states that Intercap Lending operates in, and it's not just Utah, but that's how they make you feel. They make you think it's a small thing because they care about you so much, but they're big and they're unbelievably successful. You can service your own loan. They start and continue relationships, and they build them for the long term. They're built to last. Better for consumers, and it's awesome. Steve Carter is our personal loan officer for Locked On Jazz, so you can call him at 385-800-8528 and make sure you tell him you're a Locked On Jazz listener and get the corporate discount. Intercap Lending, NMLS number 190465. For more information, visit intercaplending.com. All right, welcome back into Locked On Jazz. In the previous segment, I talked through the guards who would fit with the Jazz's young guard and Keontae George, and who figures to impact the future. But most of those guards discussed or favored would likely be needed to take in the top four that I think you'd be worth the risk. So that's where I leave it. I think wings the fit, and I think it's actually how the draft falls. The Jazz may get the best fit, maybe the best players. No matter where they are, they will be able to have their pick of the litter at wing. Obviously, you'd like to be higher so you can have the chance at anyone, but at 8 or 9, I think you're still going to have a chance. Whereas in most drafts, you need to take those dudes, the absolute dudes in the top 4, and 8 or 9 become role players if you're lucky. They become excellent role players if you're really lucky, and they become awesome players if you're extremely lucky. Well, fortunately for the Jazz, and in the mind of many Jazz fans, the Jazz want a wing, but there will be a bunch of wings around 8 or 9. So back to where I said in my big board, I have Holland, Buzelis, Williams, and Resache ranging 3 to 8. And I'll go through which have the makings to fit what I think the Jazz seem to need most. But as I've said, I prefer best available. So this isn't necessarily exactly how I would operate. The Jazz, just in general, what do they need? Let's go through the checklist. They need two-way wings who play offense by knocking down threes, spacing the floor around their other good players, and have big enough bodies to contend defensively. Even if they're not excellent defensively themselves, length is really becoming important. You're seeing what the Minnesota Timberwolves are doing to make the Nuggets struggle to score. You're seeing other teams have the same approach of having big front lines, but you need a requisite amount of skill to compensate for and shooting, honestly, is that skill for maybe the size you have. So if you're lacking for speed, maybe you can space. Those are the things. So let's say spacing in terms of shooting, size and rebounding on the other side, and just versatility overall. So based on that description and necessities, Resache may fit the best because he's a 6'9" shooter who at one point in pro ball throughout most of this season was at 48%. He finished around 39%. And he has the size, and that's streaky. I fully admit that. He has the size to impact the glass at 6'9", and he has the fluidity and coordination to handle the ball as well as pass enough to be a plus in those regards. I don't think he's a dynamic dribbler whatsoever, but when you're compared to Michael Porter Jr., I think Porter Jr. coming out of the draft prior to all of his draft injuries and early career injuries was a better athlete than Resache. And it's unlikely Resache is going to be as good a shooter as Porter is. But when that's your comparison, you can clearly excel at a role, being a shooter who spaces. And Porter was a terrible defender. The Jazz tried to expose in the playoffs in the bubble. He's become far better. I believe in that happening when you've got length and an ability to play on one side of the ball. I think you can become better on the other side of the ball, especially when you have the youth that is on Resache's side and the ability to get confidence instilled because he's that good of a shooter in theory that you'll play him just for that anyway. And then you develop the skills along with confidence, cultivating a really good holistic player. So, funnily enough, he's actually the lowest of this quartet on my board because his shooting dipped at the tail end of the year. And I do not think he's all that good of an athlete. Like I said, I think that Michael Porter Jr., despite that being a player he's likened to, was a better athlete. But that's still the archetype. Like, that's the high end of the archetype. There's plenty of other good shooters that have size in the NBA that he could follow the footsteps of. Next would be the athlete of the group. And that's the guy I think has the best chance to become an all-star, but perhaps also possesses the lowest floor. That's Ron Holland. Holland is the shortest of the wings. He's not a point guard, though, but he learned to score versus pros and in the G League. So in the G League, he was able to score against pro athletes. And that matters to me a little bit because you wouldn't say he's got this like flair and this knowledge of how to score, but he's doing a good job scoring the ball in a professional league. And that means something to me because he's also a young player. I would also say for all of his knocks shooting the ball that David Locke pointed out is he's also one of the deficient shooters. Matas Buzelis, who's lauded for being the better shooter or more skillful player, Holland shot better. He shot better from three than Buzelis. Holland also, however, he'd bring. So we talked about his deficiencies there. We talked about his possibility of scoring. We talked about his deficiencies as a shooter, though. Holland, however, would bring immediate fire and ability defensively. He's an athlete. He's a competitor. He'd be able to attack closeouts in the half court, and especially if his shot continues to develop, he'd be able to be at least a threat to score because he's scored 20 points a game in the G League, and he's 18 years old, and he could attack closeouts and impact the game defensively. I would say he does not fit as well per the size and shooting parameters being listed as needs and or preferences, but he would bring a unique skill set of defensive plus potential to score with the ball in his hands. So there's at least a pitch for him. The reason I have him the highest right now is, like I said, I'm a potential guy. I think if he were to pan out and you were to give him the ball and his shot came around, he'd have the most potential to score the most of these guys. But I don't know if he fits as well necessarily immediately with the Jazz. He's one of those guys that I think is more high ceiling, lower floor. Next would be Matas Buzelis, who's used as a foil to compare between he and Ron Holland. He's thin and slightly more feeble than some of the others in this draft, but has skill as a ball handler and as a passer at 6'11". He's, to me, a 6'11" two guard. He's got the ability to bring tremendous positional size and create matchup issues. He's regarded as being skillful, but his shooting numbers, as David Locke relayed, were alarmingly poor, and they largely have been poor even in high school. He only was above 40% in high school one of his seasons, and that is a concern to me. He does have the fit of a sizable guy who can do some things on a basketball court. So if he were there at 8, I'd be pretty excited if I'm the Jazz. And the board plays out that he's there and maybe some of these other guys are not. I don't think that's much of a consolation prize. I think he fits in as a fit guy. My assessment of Buzelis early in this year as a draft guy was, I don't want to take this guy at 1. And I kept saying that. I was like, why would I take him at 1? He doesn't look like he's a dude. Well, I realized that there's not very many dudes in this class. And so if he's there at 8, I'd be pretty ecstatic to have a guy that was once considered a possibility at 1. Okay, the same can be said for Cody Williams, who I think I wanted badly to be a point guard, but I see more of a 6'8" combo guard. And he's not the athlete his older brother is. I don't want anyone to think of this as, oh, well, maybe once he grows, he's Jalen Williams. No, he just doesn't have the twitchiness. He doesn't have the physicality, the bounce. That said, he's 3 years younger when he came out than his brother, Jalen Williams, who is spectacular. I think Jalen Williams is unbelievable. But this Williams, Cody Williams, his shooting numbers appear very good, but I would caution Jazz fans to the fact he was a reluctant shooter. He was a reluctant shooter, and that doesn't typically bode well. If the percentage is quite good, he shot 42%. At one point in the year, he's above 50 from 3. But his volume was so low. I think that's a bit of a red flag in the sense of there's a lack of confidence in the shot. And so maybe teams let him shoot and he got open looks. I think that was the case at times. But I would certainly say his shot is not broken. His touch looks good and the form and mechanics look pretty good. So it's not a glaring red flag like some of these other percentages like Buzelis and Holland really need to work on their shots. Castle really needs to work on the shot. Williams has a shot, but it just, he needs to develop confidence, and that actually scares me a little bit too. Now, the next question I would ask about role and the role definition would be, how often does he have the ball in his hands to create as he drove downhill on ISOs at Colorado a lot as a freshman, playing with all-conference vets in KJ Simpson and Tristan Da Silva. Well, that would mean that they had a lot of confidence in him against collegiate basketball players. So how much do you expect that of the Jazz? Because typically, if you're getting the ball to be a scorer, if you're a young player, that means you're likely going to be one of the better players in the future of the Jazz. So that would really bode well if he were able to play that way. Now, that said, I think a lot of his things that you would say are not great at the draft evaluation level would be he shies away from contact. He when he goes through him, even against collegiate players, he uses the floater. They're more touch finishes despite his length. But I would argue if you turn that into a pick and roll guy who can be a supplementary ball handler, that's really good. He can use his size to defend, his size to attract defenders and draw them and create for Lowry or Hendricks, who have these sizable defenders now closing in on Williams. Williams can see over the top and spray the ball out to Markin and Hendricks, who each shot the ball well from three. And maybe Keontae George can play alongside him and play a little bit off ball at those times, and Williams can knock down shots. I really like that. I would be quite drawn in. The defense would be drawn in by Williams' passing and ability to get to the rim based off those isolations or on pick and roll. And I think he's got the ability to play pick and roll well as isolation. I don't think he's quite the scorer that maybe I anticipated him being once, but I think his potential is pretty high. And I also think his floor is pretty high. He just needs to get stronger. He and Buzelis need to get stronger, but I actually like Williams in the sense that his shot, if he gains confidence, there's not much that you can poke holes in his offensive game. He just needs to get stronger, and that would be the big one. So I really like Williams because he is young. He has not learned to play physically, but as an antidote to that, he learned to play with guile. And if he becomes physically stronger, he's a real shot at helping the Jazz in many ways. He's got a multifaceted game. He can attack the rim. He can shoot floaters. He can pass. He can come off screens. And defensively, I wouldn't say he was great, but I would say he knew how to use his plus athleticism in college. And now when he's an average athlete in the NBA, I think he learned the fundamentals defensively at Colorado and can use his size as a positionally aware, sizable defender. So thanks for making Locked On Jazz your first listen. I'll ask this. Well, so let me know which guard you guys think you'd most like and why. And also if you think that guy that you want fits with the Jazz, and explain why as well. And I'll try my best to elaborate on what you guys are saying. Maybe I'll agree, maybe I won't, maybe you'll sway me even. But I guess what I'm asking is, do you think the guards that you want most actually fit with the Utah Jazz, or you just want them most because they're the best players? And how would you envision their fit once you select them, whether you see them as a fit pick or a best player available? So let me know in the comments about that. But also, I have one last ask for you guys. Thank you guys again for making Locked On Jazz your first listen, with your second listen to Locked On NBA, and learn about Anthony Edwards' greatness. But also check this out. Locked On has launched this first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. So thank you guys for listening, and I'll be back with you guys tomorrow. See ya, and as always, go Jazz.